Chapter 1, Meeting Maleu.
I was born a burden. My parents said it jokingly, but I could tell it had always been on their mind. Even as an infant, I had bronchiolitis, hypersensitive skin, and several infections. My mother used to say that I was made as if God was tired of looking out for me, and handed it all over to my parents. He couldn't be bothered anymore, she'd half joke. I was a sickly child in a healthy family. I had 3 older brothers and 2 younger sisters. And while one affliction would disappear, it would just make way for another. Bronchiolitis gave way to asthma. Infections gave way to allergies. Sensitivity gave way to eczema. Add a mix of violent migraines, bad eyesight, and car sickness, and you have 8-year-old me. I grew up near a vineyard. If you continue east from Toulouse, past Gaillac and Albi, you find this long stretch of road piercing through a sparse forest, opening to the colorful rolling hills of southern France. A lot of people just think champagne when they think of French wine, but there is so much more to it. My father used to say that before we had a country, we had wine. Now, while we didn't live on the vineyard itself, my family owned it. My father had worked those lands since he was a boy, and me and my brothers were expected to do the same. My sisters too, but in another way. But this isn't like in the movies, where we bike down some road with a half-cocked beret and baguettes in our baskets. This was hard work. We're talking chemicals, heavy machinery, inspections, quality testing. Traditions have to evolve to satisfy a modern market. So when I say hard work, I don't mean leisurely strolls down lanes of grapes. I mean dragging boxes of equipment, filling out paperwork, loading up trucks, sitting in meetings with suppliers, paying taxes, and reaching seasonal work quotas. Now, I couldn't do all that. I wanted to, but I couldn't. I couldn't run very far, and I couldn't lift heavy things without running out of breath. I'd get headaches from staring at screens. My mom had to do my laundry separate from the others, or my skin would break out in hives from the softener. I had to use special shampoo, and I had to get special buttons and zippers. I had a nickel allergy, and wouldn't you know it, most zippers and buttons use nickel. But I think I could have lived with all of that if it wasn't for my allergy to fur. All my siblings wanted was a pet, but my allergies were too strong. If they were at a friend's house, and that friend had a cat, I could get a reaction. It got so bad at times that I had to stay in the car while they went grocery shopping, in case someone at the store had a dog. I did have some medication for it, but it made me sleepy and nauseous, not a good combination for longer car rides. I remember once when my brother, Maurice, snapped at my parents. He was 5 years older and had just crossed the line into teenager. We were all sitting down for dinner, and I was having a reaction to something in the soup. My parents argued whether it was the tomatoes or the spring onions. My mom had aired out the house earlier that day, so it might just be pollen from the garden. Maurice couldn't take it. "Every day," he yelled. "Every day there's something new. Why do we even bother keeping him alive?" Of course, my mother scolded him, but it didn't matter. He was furious. "We would be so much better without you," he continued. "We could have so much. We could go anywhere, do anything. Now we're all stuck with you." He stormed out, screaming all the way up the stairs to his room. "I'd rather have a dog than you as my brother." Thing is, he wasn't wrong. He was just saying the quiet part out loud. I suppose that's the worst of it. That night, I went out into the woods. I'd taken one of my allergy pills so I wouldn't get sick from the trees, but I could feel my legs dragging from the side effects. I had filled my pockets with a small pharmacy, the standard kit for leaving the house. I wanted to find Maurice a dog. It was a stupid idea, but I really wanted him to like me. Of course, there aren't many stray dogs roaming the French countryside, but I didn't think that far. I was upset, and I didn't want to be a burden anymore. I wandered through those woods for hours, calling out for something to find me. Something I could show everyone. I just wanted to do good. It got too dark to keep going, so I decided to head back. I was disheartened. I'd made a fool of myself, again. Then I heard a splash. There were puddles in the woods from the afternoon rain, and something was splashing around in it. Something small. A frog, perhaps. I got down on my knees, letting the mud soak into my freshly cleaned jeans. "Sorry, Mom." I felt around with my hands and touched something poking against the tip of my finger. I recoiled. Sorry, I said. I don't want to hurt you. I felt around a little more, carefully. Something the size of my thumb was moving around in the mud. Not a frog, but something equally slimy. I held my hand flat, inviting it to be picked up. What are you? I asked. You're not a frog. It crawled into my hand and lay there. I held it up to my face, trying to see what it was. It didn't move. Something black, with a ridge along the spine. You want to come home with me? I asked. Or you can stay, if you want. I put my hand back down, but it didn't leave. I couldn't help but to smile. I think that was the first time something willingly chose to stay with me. But it was late, and my parents were out looking for me. I hurried into one of the storerooms and got a jar. I filled it with some rainwater and dropped my new friend in. I left the jar open if it wanted to leave, apologizing profusely, and promised I'd be back in the morning. I hid it on the far side of the house, near a pile of raked leaves. My parents were furious, of course, but mostly just worried. Maurice got a severe talking to, which didn't make things better. Not only had I been a burden to him, now he got in trouble because of it. I was probably in for a beating. I had trouble sleeping that night, trying to imagine what my friend in the jar looked like. Maybe it was a frog, after all. Like a really cool, black, punk rock kind of frog. The next morning I hurried outside to check on the little creature. I picked up the jar and noticed how it had curled up in the bottom of it, trying to submerge itself completely in the water. I hadn't filled the jar that well, and hadn't considered that it might need more water. Was it some kind of fish? Strange. I remember standing there in my flip-flops and jammy bottoms. Fog was rolling off, giving way to the early morning sun. My hands were chilly as I filled the jar with water from a garden hose and held it up against my face to get a better look. The creature was about as long as a middle finger, and blacker than coal. I could clearly see the spine of it, where little spikes poked out, but I couldn't make out what kind of creature it was. It had the head of a trout, but the body of a snake. It had gills with long tendrils coming out the side. As soon as I filled the jar up, it came to life, twirling and rolling around the jar. Almost like a dance. Then it looked at me with dark, expressionless eyes. I'll call you Maleu, I smiled. And we're gonna be best friends. Can you tell I was a Tintin kind of kid? I decided to keep Maleu hidden from my siblings. Maurice was still a bit salty about getting yelled at, so I figured it was best not to show him something he could use to hurt me. I'd never had a pet, and chances were, I'd never get one. So I decided to keep Maleu hidden away. I fed him little bits and pieces. Grapes from the vineyard, of course. Ants. Flies. And little bits and bobs I could squirrel away from my dinner and breakfast. He took his time with it, but seemed to like all of it. He also enjoyed having little things to play with, so I'd drop in little plastic soldiers and rocks and stuff. I would imagine him as a sea monster, towering over the little soldier guys. My own little kraken. After a couple of days, I noticed a weird smell coming from the jar, so I decided to take it inside to clean. I waited until no one was home, got a fresh jar from the storeroom, and hurried into the kitchen. My heart was pounding as I opened the jar, only to feel this eye-watering burn in my nose. I was having an allergic reaction to something. I filled the fresh jar with water and tipped Maleu into it before pouring the old water down the drain. I hurried back outside and almost dropped him. I had to sit down and take my asthma medication, wheezing for air, apologizing between coughs. I'm sorry, I cried. I'm sorry, I don't know what. I looked down at Maleu. He'd pressed his little fish head against the glass, looking at me with eyes wide open. Even without a single muscle to express emotion, I could tell, he was worried. There was something in that discarded water that got my allergies flaring up, that much I figured out. I tried running the tap in the kitchen to get rid of the smell, but I could still feel it. By the time my mother got back, I was scared she might notice it. Instead, she walked in with a smile. Did someone pick flowers? She asked. It smells wonderful. As my secret routine turned from days into weeks, I picked up on a few things. Maleu would do something to his water. Something I was very allergic to, but that others seemed to enjoy. If I got some of it on my hands, I'd get this terrible rash, but the smell was, to others, wonderful. There was one time when I was cleaning out the jar when my dad burst through the front door. He was probably just home to get his lunch. I hurried out the back door, leaving the dirty thing on the kitchen counter. It was free from rocks and twigs this time, but the smell was as powerful as ever. It made my insides itch. But Dad wasn't reacting like that at all. I saw him from the kitchen window, lifting the jar, turning it over, looking it up and down, sniffing it, tasting it with the tip of his tongue, then downing it in 6 big gulps. Of course, Maleu grew. The tendrils extending from his gills got longer, and his jaw grew into a sort of underbite. His scales looked stronger and had a bit of a shimmer to them. I had to upgrade him from a jar to a pot. We had a couple in storage, but I realized he didn't enjoy it. He wanted something transparent. He liked to look. He'd float around, wiggling his tail, keeping his head upright. And he'd just sit there, for hours, observing. We had an old fermentation jar in the garage. My grandfather once used it to make preserves, but it hadn't been used for a while. It was larger than my head, so there was plenty of space for Maleu to grow. It also helped that it was entirely made of glass. It also had a tap, so I could get some of the wastewater out without having to rinse through the entire thing. It was good enough. There was a corner in one of our old sheds where I knew no one ever looked, and I tried placing Maleu there, but he objected. He'd tap his head against the glass, pointing me back outside. "I don't know where to put you," I said. "I have to keep you safe." He tapped his head against the glass again. He was right, I couldn't keep him locked in the dark. There's a hill overlooking the property, right by the edge of the forest. The ground there was softer and covered in moss. I found a spot near one of the trees and dug a hole. I put Maleu's jar in it, but not all the way up. I left part of it above ground, like a window. I covered the rest in leaves and moss. I sat down next to him. No more tapping against the glass, he was happy. "I'll try to get you a cricket tomorrow," I said. "And maybe some other stuff." Maleu did a little spin. Dark eyes looked up at me from the back of the jar. "Do you need anything?" I asked. I wasn't expecting a response, but he tapped against the glass. He'd done so many times, but now it seemed more deliberate. I thought about it for a moment. "Do you really understand me?" "Tap again." I leaned my head down close, coming up eye to eye with the creature. He never blinked and only moved enough not to sink to the bottom. "Do you know you're Maleu?" Tap. He knew. "Do you like me?" I asked. He stopped for a moment to look at me, turning its head side to side, as if to get a better view of me. My heart sunk a little. Then, out of the blue, he tapped again. It was clear as day. We were friends. A couple of days later, I went back up there to change the water in his jar. It started out well enough, but I ended up spilling a whole jar of wastewater on me. I had to put him back and hurry back to the house to change my clothes before my throat swelled up. I ran through the kitchen. My dad was sitting down with my sisters, talking to them about homework. As I passed by, he called out to me, then followed me into the washroom. I changed my pants and tried to hide the stains, but he was right behind me. "What's that smell?" he asked. "Where've you been?" "Out," I said. "In the forest. I didn't go far, I wasn't by the lake or anything." He took the stained pants from the laundry basket. To me, it smelled like an asthma attack waiting to happen, but to him it was something different. "Is that wildflowers?" he asked. "Some kind of melon?" I didn't answer. I just washed my hands. I could feel a rash coming on. Dad leaned down and looked me in the eye. "Did you make that lemonade before?" he asked. "The one in the jar, on the counter?" "It's just water," I said. "It's not lemonade." "Everything is water," he smiled. "Even wine. But did you make it?" "Sort of." He smiled at me and gave me a pat on the shoulder. I think it was the first time I saw him really approve of me. "You should make more," he said. It was fantastic. I went back to Maleu every day, having little chats about everything and nothing. I told him about what my dad said, and he seemed excited. Maleu didn't seem to mind at all. I was a bit skeptical. I didn't want anyone to find Maleu, or to ask questions. So the next time I cleaned out the jar, I saved his water in bottles and filled them with wildflowers. That way it looked authentic, like I made something. Dad had never really encouraged me to make things on my own before. I wanted to make him proud. I'd seen my parents make everything in that kitchen for years, so I knew where everything was. I cleaned the bottles up, added some honey and fennel, and made my own label. I was kinda clever. I was afraid I might slip up the name Maleu someday, so I made it the label. That way, no one would bat an eye if I mentioned it. That night, as my family gathered around the dinner table, I took out every bottle of Maleu that I'd chilled during the day. Everyone got their own bottle. I told them that Dad liked it, and that I hoped they would too. They didn't know what to make of it at first. But they opened their bottles, and it fizzed a little like a light sparkling wine. And after that first sip, their frowns melted away. For the first time, there were smiles all across the table. And not just any smile, they were smiling at me. They loved it. They loved me. All summer and well into autumn, I kept up my secret routine. Maleu was large enough to have an entire meatball for dinner by then. He was longer than my foot but still had plenty of space to grow. I'd feed him, talk to him, clean his jar, and give him things to play with. But he was getting tired of toys and rocks, he wanted something new. He'd tell me with little taps on the glass. I did this thing where I took old newspapers and cut out pictures. I'd lick them and stick them to the glass for Maleu to look at. He loved them. Especially pictures of people, those were the most interesting to him. He always lingered a little longer on pictures where they smiled. I continued to make my bottles of Maleu about once a week. I told them it was my secret recipe. My father would bring home honey and fennel for me to use. Sometimes he'd bring cherries, or some fruit. We'd spend some time together making up recipes, and he encouraged me to experiment. To me it all just smelled like burning acid, but feeling useful made my heart swell with pride. I wasn't just taking, I was finally giving back. I told them I couldn't drink it myself, and that it burned me. They didn't even question it. But they all enjoyed it nonetheless. Even Maurice. This kept going for an entire year. I had the best birthday of my life, where my family wholeheartedly celebrated me. It wasn't just an obligation, they were happy too. I was getting invited into conversations. They asked my opinion on things. On New Year's Eve, I even heard my dad drunkenly brag about my drink to a neighbor. I wasn't just a sick boy, I was in the family business. There was some tension though. I'd often find Maurice out in the fields, or in the kitchen, trying to replicate my recipe. He couldn't make it, and it frustrated him to no end. He explained to me, in no uncertain terms, that he would make something better. He wouldn't be beaten by someone who could die from goddamn fabric softener. But Dad was thinking of other things. Bigger things. So come spring, we made our first bottle of wine using water from Maleu as dilution. It's usually done to balance out the sugar levels, but Dad thought it could give it a colorful musky tone. Not that I knew what the hell that meant back then. Mineral water might not change the taste, he said, but it can change the way it feels. And with this? He held up my bottle, giving it a cheeky little shake. With this, it will feel like a mother's kiss. I remember the day we finished the wine. Dad poured it into a small glass. He let it rest a little. We sat quietly around the kitchen table, waiting patiently. He smelled it, twirled it, observed the color and the consistency. And when he finally tasted it, his eyes went wide. He put down the glass and smiled at me like he'd won the lottery. He swept me up on his shoulder and hurried outside, holding the bottle as he went. He called out to my mom to try the glass in the kitchen. He put me down and we ran all the way out to the field workers. 2 of them were off to the side, having a cigarette. Dad handed over the bottle. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me that isn't the best thing you've ever had." The worker, Claude, had a sip straight from the bottle. He thought about it. Then something just clicked. A smile melted onto his face, and he laughed. He handed the bottle to the other worker with a loud hoo. Others came to look. Everyone got to try it. All the while, my dad went around to them, one by one. "My son made this," he laughed. "My son did." There were pats on my shoulder. They ruffled my hair. They lifted me up and cheered. They passed the bottle around, emptying it sip by sip. "Best damn thing I've ever tasted," someone said. "It's soft. How can it be so soft? It melts me. I love it. After that, things were wonderful, but complicated. Dad really wanted me to give him the recipe. He wanted to put it into production. But of course, I couldn't do it. He couldn't understand why, and I couldn't blame him. I was just a kid. I hated lying to him, but he'd be horrified if he knew the source. He wasn't mad about it. Just disappointed. Maurice, on the other hand, had plans of his own. One day, as I finished cleaning Maleu's jar, I noticed Maurice. He'd been following me. I thought I'd been clever, hiding the empty bottles in my school bag, but he must have heard the clinking. He hadn't spotted Maleu in the jar yet, but it was just a matter of time. He walked up to me with a smug smirk. "You hide them up here?" he asked. "What are you using?" He looked around, kicking some leaves. I didn't say a thing or move a muscle. It felt like facing a predator, like movement might trigger him. "I don't get it," he continued. "Is it mushrooms? Roots?" He picked up a rock and looked at me. I didn't meet his gaze. That was, apparently, the wrong thing for me to do. He threw the rock at me. I ducked, he missed, and it hit the side of Maleu's jar. It didn't break. Didn't even get a scratch. But it made a noise. Maurice pushed me aside. "No," I yelled out. "Please, don't." But that just spurred him on more. He pushed the moss and the dirt aside, finding the top of the jar. He grinned as he twisted the lid. The moment it popped open, I pulled out a bottle from my pack and held it like a club. "Stop it," I said. "Or else." He stopped. He dropped the lid. He turned to me. Older, stronger, healthier. He was better in every way, and yet, I'd threatened him. He wasn't having it. He wrestled me to the ground and beat me. I'd never been in a fight with him before. Not like that. It was just malice, through and through. He was enjoying himself, showing how powerless I was. As I lay with my face in the mud, I looked over at Maleu's jar. I saw something peek over the edge. Dark, expressionless eyes. The long face of a trout, opening its mouth in a silent scream. And then he began to shiver. Maurice rolled off me. He was having a seizure. It's as if he was mirroring Maleu's shaking. His eyes rolled back in his skull, and his fingers were making these weird twitching movements. He was frothing at the mouth, and the bubbles smelled like Maleu's water. I went from relieved to terrified. I rolled Maurice over, slapping him on his back. He kept coughing up this white foam, gasping for air. His eyes had turned an unnatural black, mirroring the color in Maleu. "It's okay," I waved at Maleu, trying not to think of my broken lip. "It's okay. It's okay, Maleu." He stopped shivering. He just rested his head at the edge of the jar. Then, Maurice spoke. "Are you all right, friend?" It was his mouth, but not his voice. A deep, croaking rumble. I could see a tremble in his throat, like something was about to emerge. Something pushing against the skin. My eyes went from Maurice, to Maleu, and back again. "Are you doing that?" I whispered. "He will not hurt you," Maurice said. "I will make sure." Maurice wasn't moving. I couldn't even tell if he was alive. Was he breathing, or shaking? "How do you do that?" I asked. "I go swim," he answered. "I can swim very far." I didn't have to say thank you. Maleu just plopped back into his jar. As he did, Maurice's eyes returned to a cold natural gray. He bent over, screaming from a stomachache, and couldn't stop throwing up. He had no idea what had happened. But he knew he'd lost. I felt like the king of the hill. Maurice had to stop bothering me. I felt confident. I had a friend looking out for me, and he was stronger than everyone. So the next time my dad asked me to help with the wine, I said yes, but on my terms. He couldn't touch the dilution tank. No one could. Just me. He agreed. It was mid-July when we got the tank set up. It was like a small swimming pool. No one was around when I dropped in Maleu. "You can't look out," I said. "But you'll hear people all day. Is that okay?" He tapped his head against the metal siding. He was okay with it. He had so much more room to grow. He was already the size of my leg. I had a stupid idea. I borrowed a beach ball from the shed and climbed into the tank with Maleu. It was cold and dark, but I trusted him with every fiber of my being. He was my best friend, and he would never hurt me. The water was fresh, so I wouldn't get a reaction. Instead, I blew the ball up and passed it to him. He passed it back. And before I knew it, we were playing catch, bouncing it back and forth, my laugh echoing against the hollow steel. Things would progress from there. Dad would make a trial batch using Maleu. He'd hand the bottles off to his workers and took a couple to a sommelier in Marseille. It was a hit. That first test run, tentatively named Ami de Maleu, ran out almost immediately. This was turning from a passion project to commercial sales. The whole thing was getting out of hand. I had to yell at workers to not investigate the dilution tank. My dad would wave me off. He kept his promise to leave me in charge of the tank, but I could tell he was about to budge. I could see it all slipping between my fingers. I was getting pushed out of the equation. Then again, why wouldn't I be? You can't rest an industry on the shoulders of a child. One night, I saw my dad climb up to check the dilution tank. He wanted to grab a sample to have it analyzed. He had promised me 100 times over that he wouldn't do it, but he did it anyway. I didn't understand that he needed to make sure there were no pollutants, and that it was safe to drink. You can't put mystery recipes on store shelves. But I didn't care. I felt betrayed. So I let him open, and look. The moment he opened the water tank, his eyes glazed over. He stumbled down the ladder, as if learning how to walk. He wasn't shaking, like Maurice had done. It's as if he had climbed down a new person. Like a new person. Someone who didn't know how to use his body. My dad's new dark, expressionless eyes settled on me. He smiled. "Friend," he gargled. "Best friend." Over the next few weeks, I noticed things. I saw Claude putting down a crate of filters just to stare at the sky. I saw my sister's eyes turn dark as she watched the TV, forgetting to blink. My brothers would sit on the floor next to the fridge, tasting jams and sauces straight from the jars. Maleu was using his newfound strength to look beyond the tank, using the eyes of anyone who had drunk from his waters. I remember my father coming home with dark eyes. My mother had them too. They started kissing in the hallway. But not, like, nice kissing. I'd never seen them like that before. They were pushing, biting, grabbing. I'd never seen adults act like that before. They hurried up the stairs and I didn't see them for the rest of the night. We missed dinner. But it wasn't all the time. Most of the time it was normal. Until it wasn't. I remember my 10th birthday. It was quiet. I stepped downstairs and into the dining room. They were all sitting in a circle. My mom and dad. My sisters. My brothers. All their eyes dark, with smiles plastered across their faces. Like they didn't know how to smile, but tried their best. It looked more like snarling wolves, biting down so hard their jaws trembled. "Happy birthday," they said as one. I got the seat of honor. All eyes on me. There was a carrot cake. My dad got up with a kitchen knife. He pushed my sister out of the way so hard she fell off her chair, still smiling. He leaned over the table, smashing his hand down on a plate like his joints were too stiff. It's a miracle the plate didn't crack. He leaned in with the knife, putting his entire weight on it, and cutting off the tip of his index finger. He didn't seem to notice. He didn't even cut up a slice. He just cut into the cake because that's what he'd seen in the pictures. They don't move in newspaper clippings. With both his hands, he grabbed the cake and pushed the whole thing across the table, dragging the tablecloth along. Every glass was spilled. Every plate rolled onto the floor. Spoons clattered as my siblings toppled over like fallen chess pieces, smiling all the way down. "Happy birthday, friend," Dad gargled. "Best friend." "Thank you, Maleu," I stuttered. "Thank you. I love you." "I love you too, Maleu." Dad sat down on the floor, looking up at me like a curious dog. The one remaining spoon on the table was mine. They all stared in awe, waiting for me to approve. I took a bite of the carrot cake, and their teeth began to chatter. They were so pleased. So pleased. I didn't know what to do. Maleu kept reaching further and further away. I'd see people around town walking around with dark eyes. Bus drivers, fruit vendors. I'd see them smelling flowers, running their hands across blue sunflower petals at the shop. Sometimes there'd be groups of them. They wouldn't even bother speaking like people, they'd gargle amongst themselves, exploring new and visceral sensations. I'd see them at the library. 10 people reading 10 different books at once. I'd see it at school, with our music teacher clumsily slamming their hands on the finely tuned piano. And I'd read about it in articles, where dark-eyed fishermen would disappear on long hauls, only to come back with mysterious barrels. Barrels that would make their way to our dilution tank. Maleu knew what he was doing. He didn't trust anyone but me, and it served him well. One night, I climbed back up the side of the tank. I opened it, holding my breath as to not choke on the fumes. Maleu had grown. By then he was at least 12 feet long. He'd spun himself into a spiral, resting at the bottom of the tank. All around him were these little black things, no longer than a nail. His kin, from the barrels. I didn't know what to say. Just opening my mouth made the fumes burn. Maleu uncoiled and raised himself out of the water like a cobra. His eyes were bigger than my fists. The spikes along his spine were thicker than my fingers. Just like with everything else, he'd gotten away from me. He was no longer my pet. I was his. He leaned his head in close. I could see his fangs. Translucent, like glass. He put his mouth against my forehead, as if giving me a tender kiss. It was cold, and it burned. Whatever he was doing, I was still allergic to it. "You're hurting me," I said. He leaned back. Now, like then, he understood. He coiled back into the bottom of the tank apologetically, and I climbed back down. It all came to a breaking point in late September. I woke up one night to cheers and the pitter-patter of running feet. Looking out into the field, I could see torches. They'd started the tractor. They were dragging the tank out into the open, using chains wrapped around the side. It made this long track in the ground, thoughtlessly toppling over grapevines. I put on my shoes and hurried down the stairs. My siblings were already outside, flailing with their arms and gargling at the night sky. They'd completely abandoned trying to look and sound like people. They even smelled like Maleu. They were all busy. Pushing, chasing, dancing, jumping, and yelling. One of my sisters were on her knees, just staring at the full moon. Claude was playing with a torch, running a blackened hand through the flame. But I couldn't see Mom and Dad. And then I did. They were coming out of the storeroom, holding something between them. After a couple of seconds, I could see ahead. They were holding someone up, carrying them on their shoulders. A stranger, it seemed. He was waking up. "Let me go," he yelled. "Who are you people?" Everyone threw things at him. Grapes. Tools. Gloves. He was bleeding from his forehead. And when he got closer, I could see a gash across his forehead. They'd hurt him. "What are you doing?" he asked. "What is this?" There was no response as they led him up the side of the tank. The moment he looked down, he started screaming, and he couldn't stop. He was trying to beg, and fight, and run, all at once. But his body was betraying him, and the gathering crowd held him back. I protested, but my voice was too weak. They didn't hear me. Or maybe they didn't care. They threw him into the water tank. His screams turned from panic to pain. I could hear his voice whip around, as if he was suddenly tugged and pulled in different directions. They celebrated. Cheering. Gargling. And as the screaming grew louder, a hand pulled on my finger. My youngest sister, looking up at me with dark, expressionless eyes. "We want to try," she said. "To taste. To see." "You're hurting him," I cried. "Please, you have to stop." "I'm just hurting him," she said. "Not you. Never you." "No." I protested. "This hurts. This hurts me too." That made her pause. For a moment, the movement inside the tank stopped. She held my hand, thinking. Then, a plastered smile returned to her face. "I have a solution, friend. Best friend." She hugged me. Others followed suit. Mom. Dad. Maurice. The screaming in the tank resumed. They pulled me to the ground, wrapping me in a hug. Stroking my hair and cheek. Caring for me. All the while, The screaming in the tank was cut short, replaced with the snapping of bones, and the tearing of flesh. "I love you," they whispered. "I love you." I lay there all night, listening to a man being eaten alive. The following morning, there was a bag outside the front door, and a stranger with a white car. He had covered his eyes with sunglasses. My dad took me by the hand and led me away from the others. "If it hurts, you can't look," he said. "I will take care of you." "Wait," I said. "What are you doing?" "Taking care." They put me in the car. They tossed Maurice in there too. He looked at me with dark, expressionless eyes. "I don't like this one," he said. "He goes too." They took my things, and they sent me away. I stayed with a stranger in Marseille for a while. Weeks, maybe. Maurice eventually returned to his normal self, but we couldn't make heads or tails of it. Any of it. We were just kids, we couldn't do anything. But we had a place to live. People that came and went, giving us food, washing our clothes, and giving us as large an allowance as we ever could have wished for. We could play any game. Go anywhere. See anything. And I wish I could say we fought. That we figured out a clever trick. That we were smarter than a strange frog from the woods. But we didn't, and we weren't. This was a long time ago. Ami de Maleu has a different name today. I've tried posting it here, but the post gets removed. I think it's filtered. I am almost 22 years old. I've never worked a day in my life. I have a nice car, and a big apartment. Most people think I come from trust fund money. When I say the company name, they always gasp. I'm sure you've heard of it too. I can say what I want, no one will believe me anyway. I've sent letters, but they have disappeared in the mail. Calls get disconnected. They sometimes hides the dark eyes behind sunglasses, but I can still tell who has them. They move a certain way. I can't pinpoint the moment Maurice and I gave up. Maybe it was the moment we realized we could have ice cream for dinner. Maybe it was when Maurice moved out and got a dog. Or maybe it was on my first birthday away from my family, when a dark-eyed man handed me a birthday card. There were two boys playing with a beach ball on it. "I love you," it read. They run other companies now. I know the logos. I see them on fishing boats. On trash collectors. And lately, I've sensed a familiar smell coming from the water in the shower. Perhaps there's a familiar logo at the water treatment plant as well. I've gone back a couple of times, but there's not much I can do. There are so many to stop me from trying anything. I never get closer than that hill, overlooking what used to be a vineyard. Now there are walls, and barbed wire. Mostly around the new artificial lake they've dug. But I suppose, in a way, I'm lucky. Wherever I go, someone cares. Someone watches, and listens. And if I ever feel lonely, I just walk into a crowd. I love you, Maleu. That's all I have to say. And someone, somewhere, will whisper it back.
Chapter 2, It's Too Late.
I wish I could say I took the job at the old Briarwood Asylum because I was brave, or curious, or even desperate for a thrill. The truth is, I needed the money. I'd been laid off from my last gig, rent was overdue, and the ad for a night watch position at the edge of town promised more than I'd made in months. The only catch was the location, Briarwood, a sprawling ruin of red brick and broken windows, long since abandoned by the state and left to rot at the edge of the woods. It was the kind of place people crossed the street to avoid, even in daylight. The kind of place that made the local news every few years, usually after some daring high schooler tried to spend the night and came running out at dawn, pale and shivering, refusing to talk about what they'd seen. But the pay was good, and the ad said no experience necessary. I figured I'd be sitting in a booth, maybe walking the perimeter a few times, drinking coffee and scrolling my phone until sunrise. Easy money, or so I thought. The night before my first shift, I did what any sane person would do, I Googled it. Briarwood Asylum Night Watch. The results were mostly urban legends, grainy YouTube explorations, and a handful of Reddit threads with titles like Never Work Security at Briarwood and Rules for Surviving the Asylum. I read them all, half laughing at the melodrama, half wishing I hadn't. The rules were always vague, like warnings passed around a campfire. Don't go inside after dark, one post insisted, though nobody explained why. If you hear music, cover your ears. Never answer if someone calls your name. Don't look at the windows from the inside. There were more, but they all blurred together, half superstition, half dare. I copied them into a note on my phone, just in case. It felt silly, but I'd always been a little superstitious, and I figured it couldn't hurt. I packed a bag with the essentials: flashlight, thermos, a couple of sandwiches, and a paperback I'd already read twice. I left my lucky coin at home, thinking it was better not to bring anything personal to a place like this. The last thing I did before leaving was text my sister, "Starting new job tonight. If you don't hear from me by noon, call the cops." She sent back a string of laughing emojis, but I noticed she didn't say good luck. The drive out to Briarwood took longer than I expected. The road wound through thick woods, the trees pressing close on either side, branches scraping the roof of my car. I kept the radio low, the DJ's voice a thin thread against the growing dark. By the time I saw the asylum's gates looming out of the mist, my hands were slick on the wheel. The building itself was worse than the photos. 3 stories of crumbling brick, windows boarded up or smashed out, the front steps sagging under their own weight. Weeds choked the driveway, and the old iron gates hung open, one twisted off its hinges. I parked beside a battered security shack just inside the fence, the only structure that looked like it might still have working electricity. The air was thick with the smell of rain and mildew. I slung my bag over my shoulder and made my way to the shack, the gravel crunching under my boots. The door creaked open with a reluctant groan, and I stepped inside, blinking as my eyes adjusted to the dim light. The interior was cramped but tidy: a battered desk, a folding chair, a bank of ancient monitors showing grainy feeds from cameras mounted around the perimeter. Someone had left a half-empty mug of coffee on the desk, the surface scummed over with mold. I wrinkled my nose and set my bag down, taking stock. There was a logbook on the desk, the cover worn smooth by years of nervous hands. I flipped it open, scanning the last few entries. Most were short and businesslike: all clear, 2 a.m. patrol complete, 4 a.m. but the handwriting changed near the end, growing shaky and cramped. The last entry was dated 3 days ago. It just said, "Heard music again. Staying in the shack tonight." No signature. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I checked the rest of the shack, looking for any sign of the last night watch, but found nothing except a battered thermos in the trash and a faded jacket hanging on a hook. I wondered if he'd quit, or if he'd just stopped coming in. Maybe he'd found a better job. Maybe he'd listened to the warnings. I settled into the chair and powered up the monitors, watching as the cameras flickered to life. The feeds were mostly static, but I could make out the main gates, the overgrown courtyard, and the front steps of the asylum. One camera showed the rear loading dock, the door hanging open on rusted hinges. Another showed the old playground, the swings creaking in the breeze. I tried not to imagine them moving on their own. I pulled out my phone and opened the note with the internet rules, reading them over one more time. Don't go inside after dark. That one seemed easy enough. The shack was just outside the main building, and the job description hadn't said anything about patrolling the interior. If you hear music, cover your ears. I wondered what kind of music they meant. Never answer if someone calls your name. That one made me uneasy, though I told myself it was just a prank. Don't look at the windows from the inside. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I resolved to keep my eyes on the monitors. The first hour passed in silence. I made a round of the fence, flashlight beam bouncing off twisted metal and tangled weeds. The air was cold and still, the only sound the distant croak of frogs from the woods. I kept glancing back at the asylum, half expecting to see a face in one of the broken windows, but there was nothing. Just darkness and the slow drip of rain from the eaves. I returned to the shack and poured myself a cup of coffee from my thermos, trying to ignore the way the shadows pooled in the corners. I flipped through the logbook again, reading older entries. Most were routine, but every so often there was a note that made my skin crawl. Heard footsteps in the West Hall. No one there. Lights on in Ward B reported to supervisor. Children laughing in the courtyard. No children on site. I wondered if the same person had written them all, or if the fear just seeped in over time. It was around midnight when I heard the first sound. It started as a faint melody, drifting through the rain, a few notes of a lullaby, played on an old piano. I froze, heart pounding, and remembered the rule: if you hear music, cover your ears. I pressed my hands over my ears, feeling ridiculous, but the music grew louder, winding through the night like smoke. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting to 30. When I opened them, the music was gone. I let out a shaky breath and checked the monitors. Nothing had changed. The courtyard was empty, the gates still closed. I told myself it was just my imagination, the wind playing tricks. But I kept my hands close to my ears for the rest of the night, just in case. At 2 a.m., I heard my name. It was faint, almost lost in the hiss of rain on the roof, but unmistakable. Eli. My heart skipped. I hadn't told anyone at the agency my name, and I was sure I hadn't used it online. The voice was soft, almost pleading. Eli, come here. I gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white, and remembered the rule: never answer if someone calls your name. I stayed silent, staring at the monitors, willing the voice to stop. After a minute, it faded, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breathing. I spent the rest of the night on edge, jumping at every creak and groan from the old building. At one point, I caught myself staring at the asylum's windows, trying to see inside. I looked away quickly, heart hammering, and focused on the monitors. The rules didn't say what would happen if I broke them, but I wasn't eager to find out. Just before dawn, I found something wedged behind the desk, a battered, spiral-bound notebook, the cover stained and torn. I flipped it open, squinting in the dim light. The handwriting was cramped and hurried, the ink smudged in places. The first page was dated almost a year ago. First night at Briarwood. They say it's just stories, but I'm not so sure. I turned the page, reading on. The entries were short at first, then grew longer, more frantic. Heard footsteps in the hall. Doors opening and closing. Saw something in Ward B not going back. I closed the notebook, hands shaking. I'd planned to read more, but the sun was rising, and I wanted nothing more than to get in my car and drive home. As I locked the shack behind me, I glanced back at the asylum. The windows seemed to watch me, empty and waiting. I told myself it was just a job. Just a building. Just another night. But as I drove away, the rules echoed in my mind, and I wondered what I'd gotten myself into. The second night felt different from the start. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves, that I was still getting used to the routine, but the air around Briarwood was heavier, as if the mist had thickened and settled into my bones. I arrived just before dusk, headlights cutting through the gloom, and parked in the same spot beside the battered security shack. The asylum loomed in the rearview mirror, its windows black and blind, the brickwork slick with rain. I hesitated before getting out, watching the tree line for movement, but there was nothing out there except the slow creep of shadows. Inside the shack, everything was as I'd left it. The monitors flickered with static, the logbook lay open on the desk, and my battered thermos waited for me like a small comfort. I set my bag down and checked the perimeter again, flashlight in hand, boots crunching over gravel and wet leaves. The fence was intact, the gate still chained, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching from the asylum's upper floors. I kept my eyes down, following the path around the building, and made a point not to look at the windows. By the time I finished my round, the sky was a deep bruised purple, and the first stars were blinking through the clouds. I ducked back into the shack, locking the door behind me, and poured a cup of coffee. My hands were steadier than the night before, but my mind kept drifting to the notebook I'd found wedged behind the desk. I pulled it out, smoothing the crumpled pages, and began to read. The first few entries were almost mundane. The previous night watch's name was Mark, according to the inside cover described his first impressions of Briarwood, the endless paperwork, the boredom of long nights. He mentioned the rules in passing, noting how the agency had warned him to stay out of the main building after dark. Probably just liability, he wrote. Don't want anyone falling through the floorboards. But as the entries went on, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew sloppier, the sentences shorter, as if he'd been writing in a hurry. Lights on in Ward B again. No power to that part of the building. Heard someone humming in the hall. Didn't check it out. Kids laughing in the courtyard. No kids here. Thought I saw someone by the swings. Gone when I looked again. Don't go inside after midnight. That's what the old guy said. He didn't say why. I shivered, glancing at the clock. It was only a little after 9, the night still young. I set the notebook aside and checked the monitors. The feeds were mostly useless, but every so often a shape would flicker across the screen, a branch swaying, a stray cat darting through the weeds, something too blurry to make out. I told myself it was just the low resolution, the camera's sensors struggling with the dark. Around 10, I heard the music again. It was faint, barely more than a few notes drifting through the rain, but unmistakable. I froze, heart thudding, and pressed my hands over my ears. The melody twisted and warped, growing louder, closer, until it felt like it was playing inside my skull. I counted to 30, then to 60, and finally the music faded, leaving only the hiss of static from the monitors. I let out a shaky breath and tried to laugh it off, but it didn't feel funny. I remembered the Reddit post, if you hear music, cover your ears, and wondered what would happen if I didn't. I made a mental note to never find out. The rest of the night passed slowly. I read more of Mark's journal, the entries growing stranger as the days went on. He wrote about doors opening and closing on their own, cold spots that lingered in the halls, voices whispering from behind locked doors. Sometimes I think I see someone watching from the third floor, he wrote. Tall, thin, always in the same window. When I blink, he's gone. There was a gap in the journal, a few pages torn out, the edges ragged. The next entry was dated 2 weeks later. The handwriting was almost illegible. Something's wrong with the cameras. Keep showing the same loop. Saw myself walking the grounds, but I was in the shack. Don't look at the windows. Don't answer if they call your name. Don't let them know you can see them. I closed the notebook, rubbing my eyes. The shack felt colder, the air pressing in on all sides. I checked the monitors again, looking for anything out of place. The courtyard was empty, the gate still closed, but the camera facing the playground was dark, the feed cut off by static. I tapped the screen, but nothing happened. Just after midnight, I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, crunching over gravel. I killed the lights and pressed myself against the wall, listening as the steps circled the shack. The footsteps paused by the door, then continued around the building, fading into the distance. I waited a full 5 minutes before turning the lights back on, my heart pounding in my throat. I tried to convince myself it was just a stray animal, maybe a deer or a fox, but the steps had sounded too heavy, too purposeful. I checked the monitors, but all I saw was the empty yard, the broken swings creaking in the wind. I went back to the journal, searching for anything that might explain what was happening. Mark's entries grew more frantic, the lines barely legible. Don't go near Ward B, don't even look at the door. Heard something scratching from inside. Smells like smoke. Lights on in the West Hall. No power. Saw someone moving inside. Not going in. Dreamed I was inside. Couldn't find my way out. Woke up with mud on my boots. I looked down at my own boots, clean and dry, and shivered. I wondered if Mark had gone inside, if he'd broken one of the rules without realizing it. I wondered what had happened to him. The hours dragged by. I made another round of the fence, flashlight beam darting over the tangled weeds. The air was colder now, the mist thick enough to cling to my skin. I kept my eyes down, refusing to look at the asylum's windows. I thought I heard laughter, high and thin, drifting from the playground, but when I turned my light that way, the swings were empty. Back in the shack, I poured another cup of coffee and tried to steady my nerves. I flipped through the logbook, looking for any mention of Mark, but there was nothing after that last shaky entry. I wondered if he'd quit, or if something worse had happened. I wondered if anyone would come looking for me if I disappeared. Sometime after 3, the monitors flickered, the feeds cutting in and out. For a moment, I thought I saw someone standing by the front steps, a tall figure, unmoving, face lost in shadow. I blinked, and the screen went dark. When the feed returned, the steps were empty. I spent the rest of the night reading and rereading Mark's journal, searching for patterns in his fear. The rules he'd written were different from the ones I'd found online, stranger, more desperate. Don't let them know you can see them. Don't go near Ward B, don't look at the windows. I wondered how many rules there really were, and how many I'd already broken without knowing. Dawn came slow and gray, the sky barely lighter than the night. I locked up the shack and walked to my car, glancing back at the asylum one last time. The windows were empty, but I felt their gaze on my back all the way to the road. At home, I tried to sleep, but my dreams were filled with music and laughter, footsteps echoing down endless halls. I woke with the taste of mud in my mouth and the feeling that I'd forgotten something important. I told myself it was just a job. Just another night. But as I drifted off again, Mark's words echoed in my mind, and I wondered what I'd do if the rules stopped working. I didn't want to go back for the third night. I lay in bed long after my alarm went off, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I was being ridiculous. It was just a job. Just a building. Just another night. But the memory of Mark's frantic handwriting, the echo of music in my dreams, and the way my name had floated through the rain like a secret made my skin crawl. I told myself I needed the money. I told myself I was stronger than a few ghost stories. I got dressed, packed my bag, and drove to Briarwood with my jaw clenched tight and my hands shaking on the wheel. The asylum looked different in the fog. The mist rolled thick over the grounds, swallowing the fence and softening the jagged lines of the building. The windows were dark, but I could have sworn I saw movement behind the glass as I pulled up. I parked by the shack, engine idling, and sat for a long moment, listening to the tick of the cooling metal. I thought about calling the agency and quitting. I thought about driving away and never looking back. But I got out, locked the car, and stepped into the gloom. Inside the shack, the air was stale and cold. The monitors flickered with static, the logbook lay open to a blank page, and Mark's journal waited for me on the desk. I set my bag down and checked the perimeter, flashlight beam slicing through the fog. The fence was intact, the gates chained, but the air felt charged, as if the whole world was holding its breath. I made my way around the building, boots squelching in the wet grass. The mist muffled every sound, turning my footsteps into dull thuds. I kept my eyes down, refusing to look at the windows, but I felt them watching, cold and patient. When I passed the playground, the swings creaked, though there was no wind. I hurried back to the shack, heart pounding, and locked the door behind me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the desk, staring at the monitors. The feeds were worse than ever, lines of static crawling across the screens. I tapped the camera showing the front steps, trying to clear the picture, but the image only smeared, as if something was pressing against the lens from the inside. I opened Mark's journal, flipping to the last entry I'd read. The handwriting was jagged, the words running together. Don't let them know you can see them. Don't answer the phones. Don't go inside, not even for a second. I frowned, remembering my first night, when I'd stepped into the entryway to check the fuse box after the shack's lights had flickered. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. The rules I'd found online hadn't said anything about the threshold. But Mark's words made my stomach twist. I turned the page. The next entry was shorter, almost a scrawl. Something's wrong with the clocks. Time doesn't move right in there. Saw myself in the hall, but I was outside. If you're reading this, you've already broken the rules. I sat back, the shack suddenly too small, too close. I tried to remember exactly how long I'd been inside the asylum that first night. 5 minutes? Less? I told myself it didn't matter, but the words in the journal said otherwise. The monitors flickered. For a moment, every screen went black. Then, one by one, they snapped back to life. The camera facing the rear loading dock showed a figure standing in the doorway, tall and thin, face lost in shadow. I leaned forward, heart racing, but the image blurred and dissolved before I could make out any details. I tried to focus on the routine. I checked the logbook, made notes about the weather, the state of the fence, the time I started my patrol. I read through the rules on my phone again, the vague warnings from strangers online. Don't go inside after dark. If you hear music, cover your ears. Never answer if someone calls your name. Don't look at the windows from the inside. I wondered how many rules there really were, and how many I'd missed. Just after midnight, the shack phone rang. The sound was shrill, slicing through the silence. I stared at it, pulse thudding in my ears. The agency had never called before. I let it ring, counting the seconds, but it didn't stop. After the 10th ring, I yanked the cord from the wall. The ringing continued, echoing faintly from somewhere deeper in the building. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound wormed its way through the walls, vibrating in my bones. I remembered Mark's warning, don't answer the phones. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the sound to stop. Eventually, it faded, leaving only the hiss of static from the monitors. I opened the journal again, searching for answers. The next entry was barely legible, the ink smeared and frantic. They know I went inside. I see them everywhere now. In the windows, in the halls. They call my name, but it's not my voice. If you see yourself, don't follow. I shivered, thinking of the figure on the monitor, the way it had seemed to watch me. I wondered if Mark had seen himself, if he'd followed, if that was why he'd disappeared. The shack felt colder, the air thick and wet. I wrapped my jacket tighter and tried to focus on the routine. I made another round of the fence, flashlight beam darting over the grass. The mist was thicker now, swirling around my legs. I kept my eyes down, refusing to look at the asylum. When I passed the playground, I heard laughter, high and thin, drifting through the fog. I froze, heart pounding, and remembered the rule: if you hear children laughing, turn off your flashlight until it stops. I clicked off the beam, standing in darkness, breath held tight in my chest. The laughter grew louder, echoing from all directions, then faded as suddenly as it had begun. I turned the flashlight back on and hurried back to the shack. Inside, the monitors flickered again. The camera facing the main entrance showed a door swinging open, though I knew it was chained shut. The feed glitched, and for a moment, I saw a figure standing just inside the doorway, face pressed to the glass. I blinked, and the screen went dark. I sat at the desk, staring at the journal. The next entry was the last. If you're reading this, it's too late. You've already broken the rules. Don't let them know you're afraid. Don't let them see you looking. Don't let them hear your name. Don't go inside. Don't go inside. Don't go inside. I closed the notebook, hands shaking. I tried to remember exactly what I'd done that first night. I'd stepped over the threshold, just for a minute, to check the fuse box. I'd looked at the windows, trying to see inside. I'd heard my name and tried to ignore it, but I'd listened. I'd broken the rules, not knowing what they really were. The shack phone rang again, the sound muffled and distant. I ignored it, staring at the monitors. The feeds flickered, showing empty halls, broken swings, the dark line of the fence. But in every frame, I saw movement at the edges, shadows slipping through doorways, faces pressed to the glass, hands reaching for the locks. I spent the rest of the night reading and rereading Mark's journal, searching for something I'd missed. But the words blurred together, the warnings looping in my mind. Don't go inside. Don't let them hear your name. Don't look at the windows. Don't answer the phones. Dawn came slow and gray, the sky barely lighter than the night. I locked up the shack and walked to my car, glancing back at the asylum one last time. The windows were empty, but I felt their gaze on my back all the way to the road. At home, I tried to sleep, but my dreams were filled with laughter and music, footsteps echoing down endless halls. I woke with a taste of mud in my mouth and the feeling that I'd forgotten something important. I told myself it was just a job. Just another night. But as I drifted off again, Mark's words echoed in my mind, and I wondered what I'd do if the rules stopped working. Less than per hour greater than. By the fourth night, I was running on nerves and caffeine. I barely slept during the day, haunted by dreams that felt more like memories, long, echoing corridors, music that twisted in and out of tune, laughter that turned to screams. I'd wake with my heart pounding, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, the taste of rust and earth in my mouth. I started leaving the lights on, even at home, but the shadows always found a way to creep in. Driving to Briarwood felt like descending into a tunnel. The trees pressed close, branches scraping the roof, and the sky was a flat, unbroken gray. I parked in my usual spot, engine idling for a long moment before I forced myself out. The air was colder than it should have been for late spring, heavy with the smell of rain and something sour, like old milk. The asylum loomed out of the mist, windows black and watchful. Inside the shack, I went through the motions, checked the monitors, logged the time, poured a cup of coffee, but my mind kept drifting to Mark's journal. The last entry haunted me. If you're reading this, it's too late. You've already broken the rules. Don't go inside. Don't go inside. Don't go inside. I'd tried to convince myself that stepping over the threshold that first night hadn't mattered, that I hadn't really entered the building, not the way Mark meant. But the more I read, the less certain I became. I flipped through the journal again, searching for anything I'd missed. There were pages I hadn't noticed before, stuck together with old coffee stains. I pried them apart carefully, heart thudding. The handwriting was worse here, the lines jagged and uneven, as if Mark had been writing in the dark. They watch from the windows. Sometimes I see myself watching back. The phone rings even when it's unplugged. The music is getting louder. I think it's coming from Ward B. Ward B. The name sent a chill through me. I'd seen it mentioned in the logbook, in Mark's early entries, but I'd never seen it with my own eyes. The floor plan taped to the wall of the shack showed the main entrance, the admin wing, the old dormitories, and, tucked away at the back, Ward B. The door was supposed to be chained shut, but Mark's warnings made me wonder. I checked the monitors, but the camera covering the back wing was dead, nothing but static. I tried to tell myself it was just a wiring issue, water in the lines, but the knot in my stomach tightened. I made my first round of the fence, moving quickly, eyes fixed on the ground. The mist was thicker than ever, swirling around my ankles, muffling the world. When I passed the playground, the swings were still, but I heard the faintest echo of laughter, high and thin, just at the edge of hearing. I kept walking, refusing to look back. Back in the shack, I poured another cup of coffee and stared at the monitors. The feeds flickered, showing empty halls, broken glass, and, for a moment, a shape moving in the admin wing, a tall figure, thin as a shadow, gliding past the windows. I blinked, and it was gone. I opened the journal again, flipping to the last few entries. Mark's words were barely legible, written in a trembling hand. I went inside. I had to. The music wouldn't stop. It's louder in Ward B. I think that's where they are. I saw someone look like me, but not. Don't follow. Don't let them see you. The shack phone rang, shrill and insistent. I stared at it, refusing to move. The ringing grew louder, echoing in my skull, until I wanted to scream. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound wormed its way through, vibrating in my bones. I remembered Mark's warning, don't answer the phones. I waited until the ringing stopped, breath coming in shallow gasps. I tried to focus on the routine. I checked the logbook, made another round of the fence, but the air felt wrong, charged, electric, as if a storm were about to break. When I passed the back of the building, I saw that the door to Ward B was ajar, the chain hanging loose. My flashlight flickered, the beam dancing over peeling paint and rusted hinges. I should have turned back. I should have locked myself in the shack and waited for dawn. But something pulled me forward. I need to know, to see for myself what had happened to Mark. I stepped up to the door, heart hammering, and peered inside. The hallway beyond was dark, the air thick with dust and the faint, sour smell of rot. My footsteps echoed on cracked linoleum, each step louder than the last. The music was louder here, a twisted lullaby played on broken keys, echoing down the corridor. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound seeped through, wrapping around my thoughts. I followed the hallway, passing empty rooms, doors hanging open like broken mouths. The walls were covered in scratches, words carved deep into the plaster. Help, don't look, they're here. My flashlight flickered, the beam catching on something at the end of the hall. It was a door, half open, light spilling out into the darkness. I crept closer, every instinct screaming at me to run. The music was deafening now, the notes twisting and warping, turning into voices that whispered my name. Inside the room, I found Mark. He was slumped against the far wall, knees drawn to his chest, eyes wide and staring. His mouth was open in a silent scream, lips cracked and bloody. His hands clutched a scrap of paper, the words smeared with sweat and tears. I knelt beside him, heart pounding, and pried the note from his grip. The handwriting was barely legible, but I could make out the words, "They're not patients anymore. Don't let them see you. Don't let them hear your name. Don't go inside." I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the building, and the shadows seemed to press in from all sides. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, coming closer. I killed my flashlight, pressing myself against the wall, breath held tight in my chest. The footsteps paused outside the door. I saw a shadow slip past the crack, tall and thin, moving with an unnatural grace. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to disappear. The music faded, replaced by a low, guttural whisper. "Eli. Come here." I bit my tongue, refusing to answer. The footsteps moved on, fading into the dark. When I opened my eyes, the room was empty. Mark's body was still, the note clutched in his hand. I stumbled to my feet, heart racing, and fled down the hallway, the walls closing in on all sides. The music started again, louder than before, chasing me through the corridors. I burst out the door into the night, gasping for air. The mist was thicker now, swirling around my legs, hiding the world. I ran for the shack, slamming the door behind me, and collapsed in the chair, shaking. On the desk, Mark's journal lay open to a new page. The handwriting was mine. "Don't go inside. Don't let them see you. Don't let them hear your name." I stared at the words, heart pounding. I tried to remember writing them, but my mind was blank. The rules looped in my head, over and over, until they lost all meaning. The monitors flickered, showing empty halls, broken swings, and, in every frame, a shadow moving at the edge of the light. I sat in the shack until dawn, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. When the sun finally rose, I locked the door behind me and walked to my car, glancing back at the asylum one last time. The windows were empty, but I felt their gaze on my back all the way to the road. At home, I tried to sleep, but the music followed me, twisting through my dreams. I woke with a taste of dust in my mouth and the feeling that I'd left something behind. I told myself it was just a job. Just another night. But as I drifted off again, Mark's words echoed in my mind, and I wondered if I'd ever really left the building at all. I barely remember driving to Briarwood for my 5th shift. The world outside the car windows was little more than a blur of gray and green, the trees pressing in so close they seemed to swallow the road behind me. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's face, frozen in terror, and heard the music winding through empty corridors. I kept the radio off, needing the silence, but even then, I could hear faint laughter in the back of my mind, the echo of footsteps that never quite faded. When I pulled up to the asylum, the sky was a flat, colorless wash, neither night nor day. The building looked the same as always, 3 stories of crumbling brick, windows like rows of empty eyes. The security shack stood alone, a small island of false safety in a sea of weeds and broken glass. I sat in the car for a long time, hands gripping the wheel, trying to summon the will to get out. I told myself it was just a job. Just a building. Just another night. But I knew that wasn't true anymore. I forced myself out of the car, boots crunching on gravel, and made my way to the shack. The air was colder than it should have been, thick with the smell of rain and old, rotting leaves. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, locking it again behind me out of habit, though I knew it wouldn't help. The monitors flickered with static, the logbook lay open to a blank page, and Mark's journal sat in the center of the desk, waiting. I didn't bother making coffee. I didn't check the perimeter. I just sat down and stared at the monitors, watching the feed cycle through empty halls, broken swings, the dark line of the fence. The camera covering Ward B was still dead, nothing but a gray smear. I tried not to think about what was waiting in that wing, about the cold, silent thing that wore Mark's face. I picked up the journal, flipping through the pages, searching for something I'd missed. The warnings were all there, scrawled in a hand that grew more frantic with every entry. Don't go inside. Don't let them see you. Don't let them hear your name. Don't answer the phones. Don't look at the windows. Don't follow if you see yourself. But it was too late for me. I'd already broken the rules. I set the journal down and leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes. The shack felt smaller than ever, the air thick and heavy. I tried to remember what it had felt like to be safe, to believe that rules could protect me. But all I could hear was the music, winding through the halls, growing louder with every beat of my heart. The phone rang. I stared at it, the sound sharp and insistent, cutting through the silence. I didn't move. I'd learned my lesson. The ringing grew louder, echoing in my skull, until it seemed to fill the whole world. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound wormed its way in, vibrating in my bones. When it finally stopped, the silence was worse. I stood and walked to the window, careful not to look at the asylum. The mist had rolled in again, thick and swirling, hiding the world beyond the fence. I could see the faint outline of the playground, the swings barely moving, though there was no wind. I thought I saw a figure standing by the gate, tall and thin, but when I blinked, it was gone. I turned back to the desk and found the journal open to a new page. The handwriting was mine. They're not patients anymore. The rules don't matter. If you're reading this, you're already inside. I stared at the words, heart pounding. I didn't remember writing them. I tried to close the journal, but my hands wouldn't move. The shack felt colder, the shadows pressing in from all sides. I heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, crunching over gravel. I killed the lights and pressed myself against the wall, breath held tight in my chest. The footsteps paused by the door. I heard a soft, familiar voice, my own, whispering from the other side. Eli. Come here. I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to answer. The footsteps moved on, circling the shack, fading into the mist. I sat in the dark, listening to the silence, waiting for dawn. But the sky never changed. The world outside the window was stuck in that gray, endless twilight, the mist never lifting. The monitors flickered, showing empty halls, broken glass, and, in every frame, a shadow moving at the edge of the light. I tried to write in the logbook, but the pen wouldn't work. The pages stayed blank, no matter how hard I pressed. I thought about calling the agency, about begging them to send someone else, but the phone was dead, the line nothing but static. I started to wonder if I'd ever really left the building at all. The hours stretched on, time losing all meaning. I read and reread Mark's journal, the words blurring together, warnings looping in my mind. I tried to remember the rules, to believe that they could still protect me, but they felt hollow now, like a prayer recited long after the faith was gone. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes, the shack was different. The desk was gone, the monitors dead. The walls were peeling, covered in deep, ragged scratches. Help, don't look, they're here. The air was thick with the smell of rot and dust. I stood, heart pounding, and tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. The window was black, nothing but a reflection of my own pale face. I heard music, faint and distant, winding through the halls. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound grew louder, wrapping around my thoughts. I heard laughter, high and thin, echoing from all directions. I heard my name, whispered over and over, until it lost all meaning. I tried to remember the rules, but the words slipped through my fingers, lost in the dark. I don't know how long I wandered. The shack was gone, replaced by endless corridors, doors that led to bricked-up walls, rooms that changed every time I blinked. Sometimes I saw Mark, standing at the end of a hallway, mouth open in a silent scream. Sometimes I saw myself, watching from the shadows, eyes empty and cold. I tried to find my way out, but every exit led back to Ward B. I found a notebook on the floor, the cover stained and torn. I picked it up and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was mine. Don't go inside. Don't let them see you. Don't let them hear your name. I tried to remember writing those words, but my mind was blank. Somewhere, Far away, I heard a car pull up outside the gates. I heard footsteps on gravel, the creak of the shack door, the shuffle of a new night watch settling in for their first shift. I tried to call out, to warn them, but my voice was lost in the music, swallowed by the laughter and the dark. The cycle repeats. I am still here, somewhere inside Briarwood, wandering the endless halls, searching for a way out. The rules don't matter anymore. The building has swallowed me whole. If you're reading this, you're already inside.